that could follow. The stock market had to be closed for the second time this week after it dropped more than 10% in an hour. It's lost 4/5 of its value this year. The banks are in trouble, the ruble faces a catastrophic devaluation, and interest rates have hit 140%.
Anxiety rises in inverse proportion to the share price's fall. So deep is the crisis that trading on the Russian stock exchange was suspended altogether after stocks lost 11% of their value in less than 2 hours. The sluice gates of investor confidence are open again. And with each day of crisis, Russia lurches further toward what everyone here now awaits in trepidation, a currency meltdown. Stocks rallied late in the day, but confidence, the most vital commodity of all, emphatically did not.
At this point, people are very nervous. So if times goes by and nothing happens, people start selling. And that's actually what we saw today. You know, people are getting nervous.
Talk like that becomes self-fulfilling. The billionaire financier George Soros further undermined confidence in the ruble when, in a letter to the Financial Times, he called for its devaluation by up to 25% and yet another multi-billion-dollar bailout by the West. Russia's Prime Minister Sergei Kirienko says that's not necessary. President Yeltsin has charged him with bringing order to Russia's chaotic public finances. Defending the ruble's value is the centerpiece of his government's economic strategy. He urgently needs to raise more cash by sorting out Russia's shambolic tax revenue system. Strong-arm tactics have had little effect so far. The poor can't pay and the rich simply won't. Second, he also needs to cut public spending. The spectre of social unrest is ever present. The country's miners, who haven't been paid in months, have brought their protest to the very walls of the Kremlin. One highly respected economist and a former economic advisor to President Yeltsin today warned that a currency collapse could plunge Russia into dangerous political instability.
If the government will not implement urgent measures within 2 weeks, there is a 90% probability that the current political regime, including President Yeltsin, will be forced to leave, will be forced to go before the Christmas.
Few here would support so contentious a view, but most are agreed on one thing, that the government is running out of time as well as money. It cannot afford to service its huge debt for much longer. Without radical action soon, Russia seems on course for a currency collapse sometime in the autumn. Alan Little, BBC News, Moscow.
Swiss banks have agreed to pay £800 million to Jewish survivors of the Holocaust. The money is intended as final compensation for cash and gold left with the banks before World War II, but never recovered since. 2 months ago, the banks offered less than half as much, but it's thought the threat of sanctions by big American states proved decisive.
After months of bitter negotiations in New York, the breakthrough. The victory announcement was made in the presence of campaigners and survivors.
We've reached an historic agreement with the Swiss banks that will bring moral and material justice to those who have suffered for so long and bring closure on these issues around the world and in Switzerland.
It was Estelle Sapir's lawsuit for compensation which began the process. Her father, Joseph, died in a concentration camp, and for half a century, the Swiss bank in which he deposited a considerable sum denied her claim. Thousands of Jews murdered in the Holocaust had placed money in Switzerland for safekeeping. The extermination camps didn't issue death certificates, but often the absence of any documents was used after the war by the banks as a reason for keeping the cash. Today's settlement has come about because American states and municipalities have threatened to withdraw accounts from Swiss banks.
Clearly, the sanctions were a significant part of the overall process, but there were many issues that we had to deal with. The primary concern we always had was doing the right thing and coming to a satisfactory resolution for the Holocaust survivors.
But some survivors are unimpressed. Charles Sonnabend in London lost both parents in Auschwitz and was hoping that his claim against a Swiss bank would be tested in court.
Where the facts will be read out day after day, and the press, the world press, would be able to report over a period of time what crimes were committed by the Swiss bankers.
Under the deal, the banks will make a first instalment of £100 million, with the rest payable over 3 years. The Swiss banks may have been taken out of the firing line, but there's plenty of other unfinished Holocaust business. For example, looted art and property, and the secrecy of institutions like the Vatican. The clamour for restitution will continue. John Silverman, BBC News, in the city.
Here, the government's warned privatised rail companies that their standards are unacceptable. And the compilers have reignited the great debate about whether it's permissible to ever use the split infinitive.
This book, sir, contains every word in our beloved language.
Oh, every single one, sir?
Every single word, sir.
Oh, well, in that case, sir, I hope you will not object if I also offer the doctor my most enthusiastic contrafibularities.
What to include in a dictionary has long bothered those who compiled them. The latest successor to Dr. Johnson's first one, parodied in this episode of Blackadder, is the new Oxford Dictionary of English, which took 6 years to produce. It includes 2,000 words which have only recently become a part of our language, such as
happy clappy, belonging to or characteristic of a Christian group whose worship is marked by enthusiasm and spontaneity. The full Monty, the full amount expected, desired, or possible. Sado, a person perceived as contemptible or pathetically inadequate. For, used to express desire, especially of a sexual nature.
The reason why for and oi and words like that and New Labour go in is that there is plenty of evidence that they're in use, and it seemed worthwhile to try and explain them should any High Court judges need a little help.
As well as helpful hints for the bench, there's fresh advice on grammar.
To boldly go where no man has gone before.
Star Trek, still showing on BBC Two, has unwittingly sustained one enduring dispute. Is it to boldly go or to go boldly? The Oxford Dictionary rules it's okay to split infinitives. This will infuriate traditionalists, but does it really matter?
To go boldly in the other... What does it matter?
I don't think a language should be too precious like it is in France. I like it to be creative and evolving all the time.
It does matter how you say your English because you're expressing yourself. To be more precise on what you're actually trying to say, isn't it?
Not surprisingly, as well as the latest language on the street, the dictionary features the world of technology. So a mouse potato or an otaku, someone who spends a lot of time on their rusty-dusty operating a computer, could well be chilling out in a cyber cafe, listening to Britpop, thinking about their cellulite or the effect of Prozac, and privately worrying that they're a spod. Peter Hunt, BBC News.